Pakistan. He is a director of 8 Versa, and he joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us. Take us through the challenges of breathing such polluted air and indeed the reaction we're getting from the citizenry.
Well, it probably is worth stating just how bad things are. There's broadly speaking 2 types of pollutants we need to be concerned about. One is the particulate matter, and that's dust and bits in the air, and the other is the gases. Now, particulate matter, which is the dust and the grains of pollutants in the air, that's probably around somewhere between 10 and 20 times higher than the World Health Organization limits, and the long-term effects for that are quite awful. I mean, its immediate impacts are migraines, runny nose, illness, asthma attacks. Long term, it's chronic illnesses, disease, and increased mortality. I mean, it's estimated alone that India loses 20 million person years a year purely because of air pollution.
It says human capital, and let's not forget also neighbouring Pakistan is also at the moment suffering hugely too. But are authorities in either country taking any real concrete steps to improve the situation? It does seem that they're being quite piecemeal and perhaps also not taking it quite as seriously as some would suggest.
I think that's fair. One of the problems with air quality is that by and large it costs, and it needs pretty credible and robust regulation. So there are a handful of measures that could be implemented. One of the key ones which is relevant to the region, particularly for Delhi, is what's called stubble burning, where farmers want to clear the field quickly and they burn a lot of crop waste rather than removing it in more helpful manners. There's obviously transport issues, so a lot of old diesel engines pumping out all manner of pollutants, and then there's also construction activity which creates lots of dust, and then finally there's actually a lot of issues from the power generation sector. So broadly speaking, the dependence of coal contributes maybe a quarter to a third of the pollutants in relation to particulates and dust in the air. So all of those require credible, robust, and often somewhat expensive interventions, and I think that's where the solutions tend to stall.
Let's not forget these 2 countries, Pakistan and India, are rivals, and a solution here surely has to come with cross-border cooperation, and that's something you can't really see happening in any field currently.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the air quality is a semi-localized issue, but it's very, very easy for one state or one country to affect another. And yes, cooperation is key. And often, interventions will benefit an adjacent city or even state or country, which certainly has a lot of kind of political issues. But I think it swings both ways, and the reality is that if they don't do this, the long-term effects economically and from a public health perspective are just absolutely devastating. So someone's going to have to swallow some of their political pride and get realistic about the damage that it's causing on their populations, and it will, to be quite honest, it will hold them back if they don't do this.
Chris, when you look at it, we're heading into the winter proper now, and as the cold weather gets colder, you get something called temperature inversion, which means that this smog stays closer to the ground. So are things likely to worsen before they get better?
Yes, yeah, I'm afraid so. I know it sounds quite dramatic and bad to say, but yeah, I mean, usually it can be up to twice as bad over these months relative to the warmer summer months. And yes, it's going to have to need some intervention because as you're probably quite well aware, that the way the kind of topography of Delhi, for example, actually leads to a lot of stagnance in terms of the air, and doesn't move and doesn't mix, and so there will have to be some significant interventions around people burning things for biomass for cooking, and also probably some interventions around traffic control and dust management for construction and sites and such things. Those interventions can be done now if the local government or federal government wants to initiate some kind of action. That you could see some quite tangible cuts, say a third or a half of the emissions reductions if you were to make those actions now. But it requires will, and it's going to come at an economic cost, I'm afraid.
Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Chris Hocknell there from 8 Versa.